This character is the worst in the game, but I'm still doing it because I love this stupid idiot.
Okay, yes. So that segues very nicely into the next things on here. So looking at some of the stuff in books, because so far this semester in class, I always looked at tools, and it's kind of random passage on tools because you're going to learn those by doing stuff, right? Only going to learn so much by following along, watching or listening as I talk about doing stuff or watching me do stuff. Have to get in there and do it. But we need to cover concepts, so we were looking at this list. Started before the break. I was hoping to finish before the break. Got 7 things left on here. So we're kind of having a discussion there in the break about how we treat NPCs. There's a popular one in the Star Trek game, some Star Wars games where you got different endings. Fallout's a lot like that. Mm-hmm. I don't know the name of the game. A roommate of my brother would often be playing it, but it was like feudal Japan, I guess samurai era or something. But when you got to town, nobody trusted you. So part of the game was you had to build the NPCs trust and there was different ones. So there was like corrupt, there was honest, it was a full city. There were honest NPCs and crooked NPCs. And as you decided which ones you would gain the trust of and get as allies and things. So how do we approach the game? So that conversation leads into the next few items here. The types of play. And these are just kind of vocab words you want to make sure you're using correctly when you're on a team of game developers. So competitive play, there's several different types. Head-to-head, I think everybody's familiar with that, or synchronous. Synchronous play, everything's happening at the same time. The opposite of turn-based. Turn-based is just asynchronous. One type of asynchronous. Synchronous is almost always called head-to-head, no matter what form it is, but asynchronous has lots of different types. Asynchronous turn-based is a good way to think of it. Player 1 moves, then player 2 moves. Player 3, player 4, if there's a bunch. One at a time. And it also comes in 2 formats. So not at the same time, but might not just be time. It might not at the same time, or maybe not even in the same manner, doing different things entirely, but still competing against each other. Symmetrical competitive play is where both players have same ability. Players have the same ability. The example I wrote down on my notes are like Wii tennis. The difference between your characters there is in the physical person. As far as the game goes, one player is as good as another. They're all exactly the same. Asymmetrical. Oh, only one S. That looks wrong. Asymmetrical is players have different abilities. My mind went right to Mortal Kombat because from the beginning of that, Scorpion's hook always moved faster than Sub-Zero's freeze thing. So some players had better moves. The green guy, when they brought him in like the 3rd or 4th one, he'd spit all the way across. He'd spit acid across the room quicker than either one of those moves go. They looked the same. They wore basically the same outfit, just different colors, but they had drastically different abilities. The speed, height. As far as competitive play, we have the same thing in cooperative play. There's not really a lot of confusion here. Just wanted to bring them up because proper terminology for the field. So when you're working on a team of developers, you want to make sure you're using your words correctly. Symmetrical. Is again, they have the same abilities. But it's cooperative instead of competitive. So, oh yeah, I remember what I wrote is asymmetrical. Player, they have different abilities. And for example, on my, I forgot what I wrote down, and they got around to glancing at the page. The original Super Mario Brothers versus the later versions. Because in the original one, Mario and Luigi were exactly the same, just a different color. They moved at the same speed, they jumped at the same height. Everything about them was identical, but that's not the case anymore, right? Now there's, anybody played Mario lately? They are distinctly different. Luigi jumps higher. Is that right? Luigi jumps higher and runs slightly faster. I watched the Super Mario Brothers movie last night. I watch movies on Sunday night, and they're in it that one. I was like, I bet that's a fun movie to watch. I enjoyed that. But the movie's popping in my mind now, and none of the games. Luigi jumps higher. Luigi jumps higher, and Yoshi runs faster when Luigi's on. That's the faster part. But there's distinct differences for the level. Depending on what you're getting, but the original Mario, they were just Super Mario Brothers. They were just different colors. One was green, one was red. And with cooperative play, we also have symbiotic. Where there's a reliance on each other.
That's what I was thinking when I was thinking about asymmetric co-op stuff, where one character is meant to do one thing and another character is meant to do a different one.
Okay, so that would be more symbiotic.
Yeah.
For the word symbiote, symbiosis, two things living together in order to in biology, lichens are the go-to example. There's an algae living inside a fungus, and the fungus survives off what the algae expels, and the algae survives off what the fungus expels. Asymmetric is just like where there would be a choice. That's all with the Super Mario Brothers, where you choose which one you're going to play with, and there's differences based off that choice. I think it's most FPS games are asymmetrical, where you choose the weapons are asymmetrical, but you choose which weapon would be the best for any given situation. Whereas trying to think of a symbiotic game, and or something where one player has to do something so the other one can advance.
There's all kind. A lot of co-op games that are designed first co-op, like they're
healers and role-playing games. Healers and mages and warriors. D&D, yeah. So anything that's like D&D where everybody has a role on the team, but the team's not going to survive without the whole team there.
The holy trinity of gaming: tank, DPS, healer.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of the game A Way Out? It's split screen co-op game that's meant to be able to play with like one sitting, but basically you play as two players that have to work together to escape prison.
Oh, I have not played it, but that sounds like a perfect example of symbiotic. Yeah. So keep those in mind. And yeah, what's on the board right now is use those words. Make sure you use those terms correctly when you're on a team discussing what all those earlier things need to be. What are the constraints? What's the feedback? What are the system dynamics? What's the play space? This is obviously directly goes to activities. So when you get to our book calls it actions. I like activities. But when you get to the actions, make sure it's all well defined. And then constrain it to that. I guess I could write these next two here. The book stretched this out a long ways and it wasn't clear. That's the note I have about it. Active skill and passive skill. There's nothing tricky. The active skill is the physical abilities. Whether it's the real physical world of the player hitting the controls or the virtual physics in the game of how high the player can jump, right? The what's actively happening, physical abilities and passive skill is for strategy. Not necessarily strategy games, because we talked about this before. But there's always going to be some strategy, right? In your most basic side-scrolling platform game, the player is going to. The strategy is to start at the left and move as far right on the screen as they can, because that's the standard of where the goal is. Of what we do in side-scrolling platforms goes left to right. It can go right to left, can go back and forth, but there's even that sort of strategy there. Is it okay if I erase the competitive play side? There's nothing tricky about those. Just make sure you use those words correctly when talking to other game developers. Not the critical thinking parts like we saw before the break, where you have to think about it really hard at every step of every game, every step along the way for every single game you make. These kind of go back in there to those though. Back with the critical thinking, emergence and progression. Emergence is when the play space, or maybe even the goals, change based off player actions. The games where we get a play space and we don't have a well-defined thing, we go just kind of do whatever we want in that world. The game, it emerges on its own, and progression, our outcomes are predefined. Outcomes are predefined, and player finds a path. That sounds like a good generalization of it. Take the path in the most generic way possible there. Those two are back to the critical thinking thing. What is your game doing? You got to do this all along the way and make sure you don't. More wiggle room there. Because even in a game that's completely emergence, I'll suddenly draw a blank. Really popular lately, Starfield? No, Starfield was no game. What's the new one where you're in spaceship with the really awesome graphics? Starfield? Okay. That didn't sound right when I said it. So Starfield, it's all about emergence. Right? There's all sorts of stuff you can do, but there's still points you jump off that emergence and have to enter progression.
There's games like Starfield. There was
But
There's Star Citizen and stuff like that.
there's been so many games with star in the name. This is
Basically, if it's intended to be futuristic and in space, it's typically Star.
Vice City as well. There's progression, but you can also play that game entirely as emergence. But not fully emergence because you can't change the order of the missions in Vice City. Maybe in some you can. In most of Vice Cities, you can't change the order of the missions. Maybe a few small exceptions, but the big ones, the big overall game, there's a progression to. So there's a balance of this to make it fun. And that's the ultimate question, right? Back to that classic is a hot dog a sandwich? What makes a game fun?
That varies drastically depending upon your player base.
Yes, there's a different answer for every single game in existence, right? And player. Yeah, so that's the end. Oh, is it okay if I erase this section? So next up, this is the one our book does a really lousy job covering. Action theory. From ours, they barely touched on it, but action theory isn't a unique thing here. Action theory, from what we want as game developers, we probably want the one from sociology. I'm gonna say from sociology. However, action theory is one of those bigger ones. So, along with sociology, we have and philosophy. And ethics. And anthropology, study of arthropods, which humans are one of. And psychology. Action theory is one that comes up in a lot of places. Philosophy, everybody's probably heard of the debate on free will, right? That's action theory. For game development, we probably want to think more along this, how sociologists would use action theory. What our book said? Our book said something like, I wrote it down and then crossed it off. How people process new situations and encounters. The actual definition of action theory, I'll put a big star on this. Make sure you know this because this is one that's going to show up in other classes. Pretty much any humanities class would go on that list, right? And you're not going to graduate from college without at least one humanities class. Distinction. Between things that happen to a person and things that person causes to happen. It's well known worldwide how that's a common word, right? Free will. Did that just happen to us, or do we decide to do that? It goes on at length too. But yeah, probably want to make sure you know that definition. Sure. Distinction between things that happen to a person and things that person causes to happen. Because I do that list. You're not going to get out of college. You're not going to graduate college without a humanities class. And it's going to show up in any of humanities and social sciences. Action theory. The Wikipedia page, I clicked on that earlier. It's just tons of links. One of those Wikipedia pages, like there's too much to even put on Wikipedia, so we're just going to put links on here. Britannica, they had it. Frank Lance. So, action theory, and then that's the mind body problem. Psychophysical monism. Yeah, I think they wrote, oh, yeah. So here's the sort of debates of it. Psychophysical, mind and body, monism, self, property dualism. So two things that are just impacted by each other, or mind and body duals. Those sort of things. It shows up in lots and lots of places. It's very, very in depth. See pictures of old philosophers. And if I keep scrolling, even more old philosophers we get back to. Engravings that were made years afterwards. So action theory is a very, very big thing. And our book kind of made it seem like a small thing they barely touched on. I thought they did a really lousy job touching on it. And hopefully you see how that's important for a game. Because for the person in the game, right? What did you put there just to happen to it? How much free will do you leave that player?
Like a karma system?
That would work. That'd be one place for it. It's a very, very, very open, critical thinking question. But it's you want to address that every time. So instead of that short list the book put in there, I would say go back to the full study of action theory, action theory is free will. We know it that way. And it has been studied since long before humans started writing things down. So we can go back to the very beginning of writing and see what people have thought about an action theory. And obviously that applies a lot to a game developer. How much free will do you give your player? It's okay if I erase this side. I have one more short list. And then might take a second break today, like a second break. That way and then we'll do the blender stuff. We still won't go to 450, but we'll be closer to 450 than we normally are. These 7 things took longer than I thought. The other thing, last thing in the first 4 chapters of the book, then we get into the next section. We'll talk about those in the upcoming day. Layers of experience. Not experiences and having done something. How does the player experience your game? What is the player experience for your game? And again, this is something actually from beyond game development, but I'm not going to get into it like we did with the action theory. What the book gave is sufficient. Sensory layer. That's our inputs. You probably, I kind of wrote some words to fit it back into like almost a computer thing, but some of the words maybe didn't fit that much. I think everybody knows what the 5 senses are, right? What is our feedback to the player? So there's where the player gets the feedback and anything else they need. Is it from sight, sound, vibration? How are we sending information back? That's just picking it up. Information layer kind of refers to the organization. Organize that data. Everybody know the difference between data and information? Seen that? I see a couple head nods. Information is useful data. Always like, I draw a little chain here. I got room over here. So like 4 is just an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean anything. Or there's too many things that it could mean that to do anything. So that's data. $4 has some context. we don't know what that's for, right? Are we gonna spend $4 or is somebody gonna give us $4? We know that's trade and barter. That's where it becomes information. So useful data. $4 shipping. Am I still on the board? Yep. $4 shipping. Now we know what that $4 is going for. It's being applied. Application. And that's knowledge. Then there's another step along the way, wisdom, which is the analysis and insight gained from the knowledge. In this case, I ran out of room without moving the camera and stuff, but maybe we skipped the $4 shipping and our item came in 2 weeks late and broken. Okay. There's wisdom to be gained from that experience. Next time, pay the $4. You knew what you were getting when you chose the free option, right? Data, information, knowledge, and then on to wisdom, which is the insights that we gain from the application. So that fits in here. This sensory layer is the data itself, raw data. Those graphics on the screen. The human's going to see all the graphics. That's what we usually think of first with the game, right? When we say video game, we think of the big fancy video games, but Sudoku is a video game. Very few people play that on paper anymore. But they're raw data. Then we organize that into information, give it some context. How does it fit together? The interaction layer is like processing. Using computer terms, inputs, organize it, organize that raw input. Then we can start doing stuff with it. Frame layer. How new stuff fits in. Because these first 3 layers were not happening in a vacuum, right? Not happening in isolation. There's already something going on. So how does this new stuff fit into what already exists? And then the purpose layer the actual reaction. So in game development, from seeing the graphics change on the screen down to pushing the button. This is the process that it's going to go through. And sometimes when you're putting games together, you might need to break that down. Find out problems, because one thing, when we debug our video games, we get really, really, really good at that. And we lose sight of how difficult they are. Everybody on the team might be zipping through it, no problem, because we fixed so many bugs along the way, but nobody outside our team can play the game. I forgot I was still sharing my screen. It's like, nobody outside of our team can play the game on the first try. And it's way too difficult for them. We're going to break it down and figure out why that happened. That's the process for that. That's the common terminology used for analyzing that process. That's a big one, though. You'll see it way beyond game development. So that was the list of I guess keywords. Make sure we speak correctly. At this point, hopefully you've even if you haven't quite got all the assignments in, you've done some reading and seen those words. So there's some reiteration on them. There's a lot of parts to it. We need to break away from looking at just the tools, but now we need to look at just the tools, and one that's probably going to be really interesting, right? Let's do 3D animation. That sounds good to you all? Something interesting. Probably going to make a human and give it a skeleton, but we're only going to like wave its arms, maybe not get into super walking. We'll just have our human waving, because then the rest of it would just be moving different bones. But we've been at this for a while. 5-minute break sound good? take 5 minutes, grab a sip of water, something before we switch gears, and then we'll go back to Blender and do the stuff we ran out of time for the other day. The one we actually want to get to, which is easier than what we saw the other day. I did it that way on purpose. So let's take 5. My laptop says 2:54. Oh, let's take 6 minutes in. We'll get back to it at 3 o'clock. I'm pretty sure we're still going to be done well before 4:50. But we've been sitting here for 2 hours now, so let's get up and move before sitting here for at least another